I'd rather know that I tried, even if I failed, as opposed to like sit and contemplate and have any regrets. Like the shoulda, coulda, woulda. Like there's no time for that.
At ComplexCon 2024 in Las Vegas, we sat down with Angelo Baque, the founder of streetwear brand Awake, for a special live taping of Idea Generation. The episode is powered by Chase Freedom Rise, a card for people looking to establish credit. Freedom Rise is the perfect partner to bring this episode to life because so much of Angelo's story involves the lessons he learned finding his own financial footing. From mismanaging money early on, to learning the books at Supreme, to taking on investors while launching Awake. Here's how a kid from Queens became a streetwear legend. And it all started with one idea. Thank you for joining us, Angelo.
Thanks for having me, Noah.
I appreciate that. You mentioned your own story as obviously the foundation of this brand, and your story starts in Queens. I guess, can you explain a little bit for those of us here, that didn't grow up in New York City or know what it was to live in Queens in the mid-90s? What was that like?
It sucked. Well, just to take a step back further, and yeah, man, that's a pure immigrant family right there. I had an older sister. She's 6 years older than me, and hopefully she never gets to hear this because then she'll be gassed. But to me, my older sister was the coolest, right? And growing up in a very traditional immigrant family, wherever my sister went, I had to go. So my sister started going downtown back in like 1988. And so like by default, like my 10-year-old self got exposure to, downtown culture at that age. And I immediately knew like the world is bigger than my block. The world is bigger than Queens. Like, and I could even really think about Queens as the borough as a kid. To me, it was just really about my block and my train line and my bus line and just kind of like hyper local, right? So I just knew that when I was able to figure out how to get from Lefferts Boulevard to West 4th, like that's the journey that I wanted to take. I believe that my biggest advantage in being creative is me. It's being myself. There's something about being my age where I'm at in career that I don't care anymore, right? I don't have the same belief system that I had in my early 30s. All I want is just freedom, whether it be financial, creative, mental, physical, psychological, and spiritual. To me, that's really what I'm in pursuit of right now.
I'm also curious about when you started to sort of think about how you wanted to express yourself. I know you started in photography as a teenager. You had a acclaimed run as a beat poet.
Don't bring that up, man.
What was sort of the process of bringing your form of expression into focus?
It was a slow process, I remember the day that I decided that I wanted to go to art school. I had gone to community college for 2 years, and I thought I was going to be a high school social studies teacher. And I sat down with my mother, and I was like, I want to pursue photography. And she started crying. She was like, you're going to be poor, and you're going to end up homeless. And I was like, thanks for the words of encouragement, ma'am. So it wasn't just kind of like an instantaneous, like I look at some of my peers, specifically a lot of my white peers, they were really kind of nurtured in that process, right? Some of their own parents went to SVA and Parsons and, FIT. So that really started in the household for me. That nurturing developed in the streets with my friends, right? So I had friends that were MCs or they were poets or they were photographers. So like just being around them started kind of helping me build my own courage and ownership of my creativity. Because up until that point, I didn't really believe that was my calling, right? I was just always kind of like on the peripheral of creativity. Yeah, those are my boys. Yeah, that's me in the lower corner right there, man. God bless them.
I know you worked retail at a number of places, Canal Jeans, Stussy, Fat Beats. How did that experience sort of shape how you thought about the sort of transactional relationship between the consumer and, the maker?
The most important thing I learned working at a store was building a relationship with people, if you're gonna come into the store and you're really gonna have to believe in my opinion, right? So that means like the fit got to look good. You know, the music that I'm playing, you have to respect, right? It might be a book that I'm reading on top of the counter. You might want to ask me about it. You know, I had to be well versed in art. Like there just had to be a building of trust, for me, that's it's almost like a lost art. You know, 20, 30 years ago, there was like the shop guy, right? There was like the shop guy at Fat Beats and Union and Supreme and Recon, and like everybody kind of had like their own specialty. So I think where I was able to really kind of like hone in on like learning how to be like a proper shop guy, manager, buyer, merchandiser was at Gnome de Guerre.
Simultaneously, you were also sort of dabbling a bit in media. I know you had a internship at the Source and then an internship working with Jeff Staple when he was laying out those first few issues of The Fader. Um, I guess what was sort of animating that interest?
Um, I wasn't gonna let anybody stop me. You know, like I learned like one of the hardest lessons I learned early on was I went to Bayside High School. I didn't go to Nightingale. I didn't go to the Dwight School. I didn't go to like a fancy private school where like that person's father owns this company and they're gonna help me get the internship. Like bless him too. And I knew that I was gonna have to work 3 times as hard to get my foot in the door, right? So like that. I mean, that is where I kind of credit growing up in New York City and Queens, where it's like you kind of get that hustle within that. Like I always tell like kids that come to want an internship for me and want to boohoo about like working 5 days in a row. I'm like I think from like 18 to 24, I literally worked 7 days a week. You know, I was going to school 4 days out of the week. I was interning 3 or 4 days out of the week, and then Friday through Saturday, I was folding T-shirts at like Urban Outfitters.
And did you feel exploited in that, or were you excited by it?
No, I didn't ever feel exploited. I felt, you know, like to me, there was always going to be an opportunity, right? Because you just didn't know, you didn't know, or I didn't know who I was going to come across, right? Like, and there's some people that I'm still friends with from that time period, you know, and it is not so much about the transaction of like, how can you help me 20, 30 years from now? It's just like, oh, we're both like minded, we're both in the grind. And yeah, man, like I remember like my first semester at School of Visual Arts, like I took a look around and I was like the only Latino in the room, and I was just like, I'm poor. It's like this, like you know, I was just like, this isn't for for kids like me that look like me. And I remember meeting my friend Rafael Rios. He was a Puerto Rican kid, and I ran up on him in class, and I was like, "Yo, we're gonna be friends." And he's like one of my closest friends to this day.
And clearly, you sort of, were just pushing on every door, trying to figure out how to get a foot in, and to get, some momentum and to get things moving. You're obviously aware of how incredibly different the world is in 2024 than it was in, 2002. You know, what parts of your journey do you think are still most applicable to a young person trying to figure it out?
Hard work. You know, I don't think that's something that you can cut corners on or cheat or like skip steps. I think, like the like fake it till you make it. Like I think that window is much smaller nowadays. You know, so like you could definitely charm your way through the door and get into the room. But like if you're not dope, like I'm gonna figure it out really quick. You know, so I think that kind of like incubation period that I had from like 18 to 28, like when I got that job at Supreme, like I needed those 10 years of just grinding, hustling, getting the no's, getting some yeses. And it kind of like brought me to that point of when I reached 28 and I was able to get that break.
What was your first connection to sort of entrepreneurship and financial literacy? And when did you start to sort of open your eyes to those possibilities?
So now I'm starting to feel old because I'm like bringing up like actual years. But like the first time I came to Vegas was in 1998. And I worked for a small t-shirt brand called Double Down, right? And my best friend Boz, who used to manage a store called Bobito's Footwork back in the day, and he connected me with this dude Trevor Clark that owned Double Down. And at that time, this predates like the label of streetwear, but there was the Magic convention, right, which was just a huge show where everybody would show up with a bag of T-shirts. Mark Echo can probably jump up here and give his own version too. But like I was 19 and I was surrounded what I thought was like people that were much older than me, like Jeff Staple, Wayne COD. He had a brand called Writer's Bench. Scott Sasso from 10 Deep, and I was like, yo, these dudes are kind of hustling. It reminded me of like the hustlers from my block and the hustlers that I saw growing up. I was like, they're literally like flipping their ideas onto T-shirts and getting money back. So it wasn't so much of like I didn't really understand that was entrepreneurship at the time, but I was just like, yo, they're doing something really cool and they're making money in that process.
You mentioned going to Magic and how it was sort of a proto streetwear moment. And I think this is something that, doesn't really get discussed enough. But, by the time you end up at Nom de Guerre in whatever, 2003, 2004, it's a very different world, either than the Magic world of the late 90s or the streetwear world that would emerge, in 2008, 2009. How would you describe sort of what kind of fashion you guys were sort of pioneering at the store?
I think Nome was ahead of its time. Like Nome, we had like the subterranean secret sneaker store, and then in the front of the shop you could still get a T-shirt and a hoodie, and ultimately it was a multi-brand store. It was also unisex, but the price point wasn't. I wouldn't say it was consumer friendly at the time. I don't think people really understood like how special like a M65 Macintosh jacket. I mean, I didn't really understand. I was still wearing Old Navy jeans when I worked at Nome. Like I got my first pair of like fancy jeans, like Rogan jeans.
Yeah, the first time I saw $280 Rogan jeans, I had a bit of a heart attack myself.
Yeah, like and now that's common, right? Like here we are, like 280. That's light work. You know what I'm saying? Like that's not even like a big kind of like pocket crunch. But like back in '03, there were only certain shops that can kind of move those kind of like price point pieces. But I mean, once again, like I think it was really about the time and the energy and kind of like a shift in downtown that was happening between '03 and '06 when I worked at Nom de Guerre, where there wasn't really a space that kind of sat in the intersection of like downtown and like Upper East fashion. And I'm not saying because I worked there, but everybody was good looking that worked there. You know what I'm saying? So it was like a bunch of good looking dudes. So like it was the first time like I felt kind of objectified by women. Like girls would just come by to hang around.
Not the last.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like where was cancel culture when I needed it back in '03, No, but in all seriousness, it was just like a bunch of good looking guys. Everybody dressed smart. Nobody has seen that yet. At that point, it's still about like the kind of like you attitude when you walk into a store in downtown. We were nice, we were friendly. So yeah, it was a huge shift, and unfortunately, I think it was 10 years too early. My ideas come from, as corny as it sounds, from the inside. I'm grateful to have come up in a time in New York City that to this day is still being referenced, early, mid, late 90s. Anytime that I feel stuck creatively, I always reach back to a certain time period that just brought me joy, right? So if it's a certain album or a certain body of art that really influenced me around that time period, I have like my own internal algorithm that's based around my youth in New York City.
How did you engineer that leap from working retail to then getting sort of into the office at Supreme?
Well, I can't really take any credit for that. So before I worked at Nome, I worked at Stussy, and a lot of people didn't really understand that James Jebbia, that owns Supreme, he owned the Stussy New York store. So he didn't own the brand, he just owned the shop, and he was a partner in the New York Stussy shop. So I worked there from 2000 to 2003, just like a regular shop kid. Then left for Nome, helped Nome bubble and kind of pop. And there was this kind of like a weird kind of like purgatory phase of Supreme during that time of like '03 to '06, where it was trying to find its footing. And if I don't know if anybody's old enough, I see you, Abdul. I know you're old enough to remember. Not to call you out, not to age shame you or anything like that, but like A Life
Mm-hmm.
was hitting heavy at that time.
Rivington Club.
Aaron started anything, so there was a lot of different downtown movements that were happening, and it's almost like at that, believe it or not, Supreme was like 5 steps behind, right? I was curating art shows. We hosted like the Maharishi book. We had girls showing up. Traditionally, believe it or not, streetwear is like a meat fest. Usually, girls don't show up to events, so like we actually had women showing up. And then one day, James hit me up and he was like, "Oi, I heard you're not making any money there. Why don't you come make some money with me?" And I was like, "Okay." And I didn't. There was no predecessor at the brand. There was no bullet point for job description. It was literally like, whatever you're doing there, I want you to come over here and help me run Supreme.
Was there a self-awareness from James or within the office about being those 5 steps behind?
Um, I think it was really more of, I think the genius of James and the way he's operated and run Supreme is that he isn't really the face of the brand, right? There is always kind of a placeholder. Um, so when you think of Supreme, like you think of Aaron, or you thought of me at a certain point, and then I helped bring in like the Cherry Kids, which is like Sage and Sean Pablo and Tyshawn Jones. Like there was always this kind of revolving cast of characters around the brand to always make it look and feel young, right? So I think it was just at the time there wasn't really that person that you would call kind of like an ear to the street that was working internally at the office, that basically like had one foot in the office and one foot still in the streets.
And as brand director, what would you say were sort of, although there was not a job description, I'm sure that you developed a set of duties that you were responsible for. What did that look like?
Man, so when I first started at Supreme, like the team was still very small. So I was able to kind of jump across and dip my hand in different buckets. So design, marketing, brand collaboration, growth strategy, uh, all the campaigns that you saw, like developing the aesthetic of that, where I was able to bring in like my photo background, my photo education, my magazine, experience, um, working with stylists, doing the PR, so I literally kind of had like 4 or 5 jobs encompassed in one, which I loved. It just created a freedom and a kind of a playground that I'd never experienced before. And through my whole tenure, like I never had like a director or anyone that I reported to. Like if I had an idea, I would just go straight to James. Like, "You like red shoes?" He'd be like, "No." "Okay, cool. I guess we're not making red shoes." Like, it was a simple design process.
When you reflect on those years, what were the most crucial sort of learnings that you took away from your time, both watching the brand evolve and then directly working with James?
Um, Man, to be honest, like I said, like having like that 10-year period before working there, I thought I knew how to work hard. And then when I witnessed working side by side with James and seeing how hard and how much time, I mean, a lot of time and effort he put into the brand, it made me want to step up and work harder. Right. Like it just kind of like unlocked um, just a new sense of drive and energy that I didn't know I had within myself. Right. Like it was just like, yeah, it was just like new character unlocked. Like I feel like every year I worked there, like I just got stronger and stronger and stronger. Because I never thought I could keep up with him.
Where in that journey did the seeds for Awake start to get planted?
2012. So the thing with working at Supreme, I always wanted to make sure I held on to my own identity as Angelo Baque. I never wanted to be fully consumed by the brand. I knew that no matter what, by default, it was always going to be like, "Yo, that's Angelo from Supreme." Okay, cool. but I also have, other interests, other inspirations that were outside of that brand. And also, I started kind of like this new phase of maturation, right? Like I didn't want to wear a hoodie that said all over it. You know what I mean? Like maybe I wanted to wear like some two-tone loafers. Maybe I want like a Turnbull and Asser, button-down shirt. Like I don't know. Like there's, ultimately Supreme was never my brand. I never had an opportunity to make a final decision or final call. That was never my place. So for me, it was important to have ownership of something, right? That's like I like this is what I want to make. So this is what I'm gonna do, and no one can tell me that I can't.
And how did you arrive on the name and sort of the general sense of branding and the idea?
I've so I was living on the Upper West Side, but I'm gonna give everybody the true story of how Awake came about because there's a lot of different answers that I come up with, but I'm ready to be vulnerable with you, Noah. So I woke up one Sunday morning like extremely hungover, and I used to live on 101st Street in Central Park West. My stepfather had this rent control apartment up there, and the Jehovah Witnesses were on the block, right? So this is probably like 2010, 2011, and they had the pamphlet in the hand that said "Awake" with the big exclamation point, and I was like, "That's dope." That's dope. I was like, that's hard. And I was like, that's strong. And I'm like, I literally put it in my back pocket. I'm like, I'm going to hold on to that and wait for when I'm ready. Because to me, it felt sophisticated. It felt elevated. Also because I was living on the upper West Side. Like I had this romanticism of like Barney Greengrass meets the projects meets jazz. Like I just wanted to do something different and off.
What was James's attitude towards you having this sort of personal project that you were doing that is potentially somewhat competitive?
Yeah, it wasn't great. It wasn't welcome with open arms. But even and then that's why like I had to work harder. You know what I'm saying? Like I had to make sure that, there wasn't any excuses to get like the talk. Like Angelo, we need to really talk about your performance. Like I never gave that man an opportunity to like, you know, yeah, I never nobody ever wants a talking to. You know what I mean? So like yeah, 9 to 6, I'm focused, I'm locked in, and even like 6 to midnight, I'm still in. But then once I clock out, like I'm working on my own project and really respecting that boundary and having like that separation of church and state between like what's actually paying the bills and what's a passion project right now.
And what was the catalyst for you to decide to finally, hang up your jersey and put it in the rafters
Put it up
and
in the rafters.
yes.
I hit my ceiling, like I mentioned before. Like there was really nowhere left for me to go. I had done every dream project that I wanted to do at that point. Um, I was getting close to 40, and I didn't want to be the old guy working at a streetwear brand, right? Like, because the thing is, like, I want to, which I think I'm doing right now, is like age gracefully, right? So, like, for me, it was really important, for example, the Wake, to have someone like Hugo Mendoza in place, right? Like, where it's like, all right, this is the dude that's running the streets. He's fully in the streets. I'm not. Sounds like somebody who knows Hugo in the crowd, and give him an opportunity, right? Same way, like you graduate retail high and you come into the office, which is what every shop guy, every shop person wants. Like everybody wants their shot at being able to actually, work for the brand and not just be working in the store. You know, so that really for me was the catalyst to kind of get out of there and really focus on ownership.
What's the most important idea you've ever had?
I wouldn't call it an idea because it wasn't my idea, but getting sober, coming up on 10 years of sobriety on the 21st of this month, and I don't know, call it divine intervention, or I could just credit my ex-girlfriend I was living with at the time. But yeah, I think that's the best idea I ever had.
Throughout your career, one of the things that I think is sort of most exceptional is your ability to build brands. What do you think is the difference between a company and a brand?
Well, a company, I think, is as a former employee, right? You check in and you check out, and you kind of don't give a shit, right? And when you're building a brand, and I'm going to speak bipartisan because I have a brand. I think there's more emotional. There's more of an emotional connection. There's blood, sweat, and tears that's involved, and I would say there's more of a commitment, right, and a vision. So I think that for me, that's kind of the difference between a company and a brand.
What is the key to communicating that storytelling to your consumers?
I think the biggest key to communicating the story is being able to tell my story, right? I think growing up in the brands that I really loved, you didn't really hear much about Ralph Lauren or Tommy Hilfiger, or I don't know, even like say like PNB Nation. You know, you didn't really get much access to the actual the creatives and the designers that are behind the brand. And I think now there's a lot more transparency and accessibility to the people behind the brands. So I think it's always important, you know, like I think at this point, like if you're into Awake, it's not so much about the logo or the hoodie or the hat, but you're having like an emotional connection to the brand because it's something that we're saying that you gravitate towards.
Tell me about when you do stake out on your own with Awake. What was the process for putting together the seed capital and actually building the financial side of the business?
Young people ask me that all the time, like, yo, like I got a great job. I got this idea. I want to start my own brand. You know, what do I do? And to me, it was an 18-month process. You know, like I like to eat, I like to travel, I like to pay my rent on time. So I made sure that 18 months out, I started saving money, right? I knew that the day that I left Supreme, that I want to be able to continue a certain lifestyle that I had grown accustomed to, right? So I had to make sure I had my office rent money. I knew I wanted to hire at least an assistant. So like no matter what, if no money came in that first year business, because when I first left Supreme, the focus was on Baque Creative. I started my creative agency, right? So I wanted to take all the things I had learned at Supreme and basically package it, and then um, offer the services to bigger brands like Nike, Timberland, Converse. You know, I continued to do like ghost art direction for Supreme for about a year and a half after I left. So the intention was never really to start Awake, and that's why I left Supreme. It was really to focus on the agency. So I think it's really about having that strategy of like also what's really important is don't burn the bridge. You know, like I can see James in the street right now and we're good. You know what I'm saying? I can see any of the people I used to work with and we're good. Like there's something about exiting a job with grace and dignity. Like I helped build that business for 10 years. I put a lot of my time and energy into that brand. So like why would I want to burn down the house on the way out? You know what I'm saying? That's silly. You know, whether or not, you know, we're in tandem working together today is not really about that, you know, and there's something about professionalism too that I think that should be spoken about more with the younger generation coming up. And that was just, you know, things that I had to learn on my own.
I'm curious. Obviously, you had to make a series of creative decisions while you were working at Supreme, but with the comfort of being an employee, you then build your own brand, and all of a sudden you are, gambling your own money. Did that change how you thought about making those types of decisions?
Hell yeah, it's my money. You know, it's different when you're playing with somebody else's money and you got that corporate card in your pocket. You know what I mean? Like you're not really contemplating like a fancy lunch or like that business class ticket on an airplane, you know, but when it's your money, it's a completely different approach and a different level of responsibility and consideration that I just didn't have when I worked for someone else, you know, and then also just a fear, you know what I'm saying? Like no, like nobody wants to go broke. Like for me, like I used to think like going broke equated to failure. And that was the last thing I used to like. I used to just focus on that like my first 2 years out. I was like I'm not failing, man. Like there's no way I'm gonna fail doing this, man. Like I'm gonna do what I got to do in order to succeed.
And, as you're putting these ideas together in your head, how formal is the process of bringing them to life and are you putting these on paper? Are you making a business plan, mood boards, et cetera, or is this all just kind of creative decisions on the fly?
I think it depends, like project to project. For me, the mood boards always appear. The mood board is in my head. I hate mood boards, to be honest, man. Like, because everybody's like in the same algorithm. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, how many times am I going to see the same photo of Bjork with Goldie in 1996? Like, okay, I get it. You know what I mean? Like, um, so it's like you got to dig a little deeper. So I'm not really big on mood boards. And I'm also not big on final finished product. Like when people are pitching me, like I want to see what your thought process is first. Like what were you listening to? What were you watching? Okay, that led you to like the color purple, not as in the movie, but like the color purple. And then you listen to this song. Okay, like also what I learned at Supreme, there wasn't there wasn't such a thing as a bad idea. Like everybody had an opportunity to have a say, right? Like even the dude that was throwing out the trash, James would be like, "Hey, like, what do you think about this glass?" Like everybody had a say, which I love. It was super democratic. Um, so what I love to hear is just kind of like that fearless pitch. You know what I'm saying? Like, really stand behind what you believe in, what you like, what you're into, because you don't know where that thought or that idea is going to lead to next, right? Because for me, it's kind of like that, one to grow on, each one teach one, like I like you just for me is like constantly having an open mind and not being like, yo, that's whack. Don't ever do that again, because then you're really not nurturing the talent around you, right? Because eventually, then people just start shutting down and they're just afraid of pitching. Bad financial decisions, absolutely. I had a T-shirt brand in the early 2000s. It was called Absurd, and there was a lot of cash transactions because back then. The equivalent of what we see as like the internet and like online shopping was Japan. So we would have Japanese buyers come through and give us like 10, 20 grand in cash. And I would just go straight and buy sneakers and take my girlfriend out on dates instead of like reinvestment. Like I didn't understand what reinvestment was. I just figured that the money would keep coming. So yeah, I made a few bad financial mistakes as a kid.
You mentioned Hugo, and obviously he is now your brand director at Awake, and in a role that somewhat mirrors the role that you had at Supreme 15 years earlier. Um, you know, I guess what are the things that you have taken away from your experience being in that role, now being on the other side and sitting in James's seat, both the good and the bad, as you approach managing Hugo and sort of nurturing his talent?
Um, Giving opportunity for creative growth, right? Because for me to sit up here and tell you that I'm not like a control micromanager kind of person, I'd be lying. You know what I mean? Like I am a control freak. So I think it's really starting to practice letting go a bit, right? And empowering. Like it took me about like 4 or 5 years into working at Supreme where I started really having agency and ownership of like my day-to-day work, right? Like just full trust, right? So like for me that I want to expedite that process. I'm not trying to wait 4 or 5 years to trust that Hugo can do an in-store activation, right? And really and kind of take the whatever negatives I thought were prior and turn them into positives where it's like I it's not about like continuing that cycle of punishment, right? Where it's like that didn't really feel good. So I'm going to try and work the opposite way in order to get the best out of this person.
What are the greatest joys of entrepreneurship and also the most arduous challenges?
My intention wasn't really like when I left Supreme and I really started honing in on Awake with being able to create opportunity for others. And for me, like that's what Awake is really about. All the different projects that I've been able to work on. For example, like 2016 when we did our first drop was during like Standing Rock and all that, and I'm like, I'm not gonna go protest in the field, so I'm down to donate some money towards like lawyer bills, and then that idea kind of grew into like anytime that we work with a bigger corporation, I want to make sure that there's some kind of give back component in the business dealings that we're doing, right? And nobody was doing that back in 2016, 2017. Like that's normal now that we're post pandemic, post everything that's happened like socially and politically in this country, that now everybody suddenly like has like heartstrings attached to their purse strings to make themselves like morally feel better about whatever it is that they do. So I'm really proud of us being able to kind of like shift the way people think and operate in the fashion space. I would even say like just streetwear, right? Like to me, it's just like we've been able to have like a positive ripple effect of the way um, people work in our space.
In the 8 years that you've been operating this business, how have your sort of thoughts or approaches to running the finances changed?
Well, one, I had to take on an investor. I was fully independent up until 2 years ago. A few things that happened, during the pandemic. One of the blessings were we started growing. So I needed to hire more people. I wanted to open up a store, even though I didn't want to open up a store. And I didn't have the finances for that at that point. So I knew if I wanted to kind of start hitting this kind of like new benchmark in business for Awake, I had to go seek financial help.
And what are the sort of pluses and minuses of having a relationship like that?
Well, now there's a different consideration because, like, even though it's technically not my money, it's our money. I feel like I have to now perform, right? It's just different when you have a partner. Like the freedom when you're like fully independent and you're on your own is much different when you have a partner. That being said, I'm not sure if my partner's in the crowd right now. I really love you guys. Because it could be, I've heard other peers that have taken on partners and they're in not the best situations like the one I'm in right now. I'm very grateful that my partners are very laissez-faire with me, but it's just a completely different dynamic.
What are the goals that you have for Awake in the next several years?
To open up more stores. I'm really interested in Asia right now. We have a strong following in Tokyo. I think for me, like opening up a store in Tokyo would be the kind of next chapter in our narrative, and just really hone in on New York, just really owning New York. The blessing with having the store is finally graduating from like an Instagram brand and you know offering an awake retail experience for our customer, but then also is like the things that we talked about, this morning, like all the stores that we fell in love with, like being able to tap into that and really build a home for basically like all the outerwear, not outerwear, outer borough kids from the city.
Corporate collaboration is kind of become part and parcel of sort of all streetwear businesses at this point. And I'm curious, sort of, what is the key to making those relationships work for you? Whether it's collaborating with Coca-Cola or an Asics or a Jordan.
What's the benefits of working with those
Well,
corporations?
yeah, how do you make it work so that it is to the ultimate benefit of you and your consumer?
It's always about the amplification of the brand, right? Like I'm not thinking solely on New York City, but it's just like, all right, I got to start thinking globally. So the whole point of working, for example, like with Jordan, it's like I'm not assuming that the normal kid that collects Jordans knows who Awake is, right? So like their Instagram following, they got like 20 million plus followers, you know? So for me, that it's, I'm thinking about like, what can we bring different to the table that they haven't done already, right? What's a different perspective or a different view that we can bring to the table with this collaboration? But then also at the same time, it's just like, how do we just continue to amplify the voice of the brand outside of New York?
If you were to offer any final words of advice to any of the young people in the crowd today that are looking to start a streetwear brand in 2025, what would you advise them?
Don't do it. Use your money more wisely. Um, no, I would say do it. You know what I'm saying? Like to me, like that's really inspiring. You know, like I'm not looking at our peers for inspiration. Like for me, what's really cool is the kid that's going to like Second Street Vintage and copping like 5 hoodies, taking it back home. They're remixing it and then they're selling it on their IG page. You know, it's frustrating because I can't move that fast, right?
What about the kid that goes to Second Street Vintage and buys a Friends and Family Awake airship?
Well, damn, that's pretty fucked up, man. Like, I'm still trying to figure out who did that. Shame on you. Are you here? Raise your hand. Um, no, for me, like it's like I would say like don't sit on the idea. Just get it out, and you know, I rather I rather know that I tried, even if I failed, as opposed to like sit and contemplate and have any regrets. You know, like the shoulda, coulda, woulda. You know, like there's no time for that. Like life's too short. You know, and not trying to get morbid and shit, but it's just like so many of my friends have passed away in the last 3 to 4 years that it kind of pushes me to kind of really be grateful for every day and not take life for granted, man. Like the fact that we're all here, we're all, you know, at ComplexCon in Las Vegas, like it's a blessing, man. You know what I'm saying? Like don't take these moments for granted, you know. And I'm not sure we're out of time, but you know, I like to tell just a quick story. But a month ago, a month and a half ago, when I was shooting the commercial video for the Jordan collab, I wanted Clark Kent to be in it. Clark Kent was in the first video, right? And the I didn't really have the budget to bring Clark back in, so I felt really bad, right? And I was kind of avoiding Clark, and I was just like, he's not even thinking about it. He doesn't care. Who cares? You know what I'm saying? And then I was talking to my wife about it, and she was like, and I was telling her like the significance of Clark and who he was in my life. And she was like, you should pick up the phone and call him. So I was like, all right. So I picked up the phone. I called Clark. He picked up. He's like, yo, what's up? I was like, yo, Clark, my bad. You know, we're shooting the video in 2 days. I don't got that bread that I said I have for you, but I got X amount of dollars if you want to just join like the family portrait at the end of the video. And he was like, yo, I really don't have the energy for that right now. And I was just like, okay, you know, I'm over here thinking, I didn't think anything of it. I was like, so we keep talking. And then he was like, he mentioned it again. He was like, yo, Ange, I really don't got the energy to leave my house right now. And I'm like, all right. I was like, you good? And he was like, you don't know. I was like, no, what? He was like, you know, back in 2019, I was, um, I was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. And, my heart dropped, man. And I was like, man, I'm, you know, I was like, I didn't know Clark. You know, but I thanked him for confiding that information on me. He's like, you know, keep that to yourself, keep it to the chest, don't tell nobody. I was like, yeah, I wouldn't do that. And he goes, you know, Ange, the only thing that I want right now is time. You know, he's like, I just want time with my family. I want more time on earth right now. You know, that's all I want. And I've really been holding on to that since that conversation. You know, I hung up the phone and I literally cried for like a half hour with my wife. You know, I told her what the information that I received from Clark, and he also had mentioned to me. He was just like, you know, uh, like I'm at the very end. You know, he's like, it's not about if, it's really about when. And I was like, okay. And he was so calm and relaxed and just full acceptance of where he was that it really it knocked the cool out of me. You know, and and I say that to say, you know, like when it comes back to what, just to bring it back to the idea and getting your idea out there, like, you know, don't take time for granted. You know, none of this is promised. you know, and make sure you spend a lot of time with your loved ones, man. Because none of this is real, by the way. Like ComplexCon or what all this stuff, like sneakers and hoodies and whatever, like whatever. That comes and goes. Money comes and goes, man. But like, really, just spend time with your loved ones today.
That's a very nice note for us to end this on. And thank you, Angelo, for the candor and the wisdom. It's great to talk, man. Congratulations on your success. And yeah, also, as a new father, I hope that you're able to take the time, and put it where it should be.
Absolutely.
Thank you all
Noah.
for joining us.
Thank y'all, man. Thank you.